My name is Nurideen Lindsey, and tonight I'll be talking to you about a few decades I feel have influenced our culture as of today. The 20th century was filled with decades of many changes. Many people argue various decades as being the most impactful on our country, but I believe the 1980s were the most influential of them all. This decade was one of the great changes and accomplishments for the United States, simply because sports and entertainment as well as technology were on the rise and the most recognizable of the century. Sports in the 1980s were a vital part of America's moral. Athletes were bestowed with celebrity status. Sporting events drew larger crowds more than ever before for games. In regards to football, the 1980s were known as the decade of the quarterback. Even though the Chicago Bears showcased the great running back in Walter Payton, Joe Montana was said to be the most unparalleled of them all. The NBA also embodied future legends such as Charles Barkley, Larry Bird, Isaiah Thomas, Irvin Magic Johnson, Clyde Drexler, Patrick Ewing, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Michael Jordan. These superstars transcended the game to new heights, and Michael Jordan set the stage for endorsements that no one could have ever foreseen. The entertainment industry of the 1980s jump-started many careers of modern-day stars. In many ways, this decade began the manifestation of Dr. Martin Luther King's dreams from previous decades. Many African Americans excelled greatly in the entertainment industry during this decade. Just 2 years ago, we mourned the death of the king of pop, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson owned the entertainment spotlight during this decade. In 1982, Michael Jackson released the album Thriller, which still holds the record for most copies of an album ever sold. In 1985, he collaborated with other high-profile artists to raise funds in Africa and recorded the song We Are the World. In regards to television, The Cosby Show premiered in 1984 and was also significant for the upward movement of equality for African Americans. There was still a strong stereotype of African American families being portrayed up until that point. Shows such as Dynasty and Dallas displayed a lifestyle in which many American families only dreamed of living and actually set the standard of many of our soap operas that air today. Technological advancements made in the 1980s are still in place today and are continuously being modified for perfection. English physicist Tim Berners invented what was then bulletin boards, which is what we now know as the internet. In 1984, the Apple computer released the Macintosh, which was the first actual personal computer. The compact disc was also introduced to America during this decade, which immediately changed the way we would listen to music moving forward. Video games were also introduced to America during this decade, such as Space Invaders, as well as the infamous Pac-Man took over the households and set a video game trend that has truly elevated over years to come. Maybe the most influential technological device ever created during this decade, the cell phone. About 83 million cell phones were sold in the United States during 2010. Can you even think of anyone at this moment you know that does not own a cell phone? And if they don't, I'm sure you have shared a joke or two about their reason for not owning one. Well, this device was rather large at its inception in the 1980s, but has been modified over the years, adding various features suiting all owners. As I took the time to research various decades of this century, I was so impressed with the information I learned from each one. Naturally, I was taken by the African American movement of the early decades, but I must say I was thoroughly impressed by how the 1980s jump-started the world I know today. So for those who were able to live during this decade and witness transition of sports, entertainment, and technology, I must say you are truly lucky.